G'day, see you, and welcome to Ecclesiastes Talk 3 as we go on this journey with the teacher to find out, to try and discover what can be gained from life under the sun. What can I contribute to what is happening in this life, in this world, in this creation? And in chapter 3, the teacher stands back and he looks at the rhythms of life and he weighs them up and considers how does this give us answers, or what kind of questions does this raise about what can be gained under the sun? Listen to this beautiful part of the Bible, which is very famous. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 through to 8. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. There's something really beautiful, isn't there, about that, about this part of Scripture. It seems to be saying, don't take yourself too seriously. Don't try and control life. Rather, go with the flow. There's a time for everything in life. Life happens to us. Just receive those times and those moments and enjoy them for what they are. It's a kind of slightly whimsical take on life, which is helpful. Don't get stuck in a rut. Don't get stuck in a moment. There's a time for everything under the sun. But the bigger question that the teacher seems to be asking here is, what is all this about? There is some sort of overarching narrative here, it seems. There's a time for everything, but where's it all heading? Just imagine, you went to a footy match and you didn't know the rules. You've never been to an AFL game before, you don't watch it on TV, you don't follow a team, and you're going along. What would you make of it all? My wife did exactly this years ago when we first moved to Melbourne. We both went to a footy match with a bunch of CU students, actually. And what do you make of it all? The siren goes. There's excitement, a buzz in the crowd. At times they boo and hiss. At other times they, cheer and jump up out of their seats, all excited. There are lulls in the game for long periods of time. Sometimes there's hot dogs. There's pies. There are these funny breaks, 3 of them throughout the match, and it goes on forever and ever. People spit out advice at the umpires. All this stuff is going on. There seems to be a moment for everything during this game, highs and lows. But what's it all about? Look here in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11. God has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. And so what he seems to be pointing out there is that there's all this stuff going on in life that we can perceive, that we experience. And God has given us the capacity, the ability to stand back and ask this question, where's it all heading? Where's it come from? Where's it going? It must all mean something. But the answer that the teacher comes up with, like the person who's going to the footy match who's never been before, is we just don't know. You go to the footy match, you know something's going on, you know there must be some rhyme or reason that holds it all together, but you just don't actually know what it is. And that's what the teacher concludes about life. There's a season for everything, but who knows what it's all about, how all these seasons fit together. Let me read that verse I just read before again, but in context. What do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. God has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. Do you see what he says there? He says, this is a burden that God has put on the human heart. This is a repeated theme. Do you remember it from Ecclesiastes chapter 1? In chapter 1 it says, what a heavy burden God has laid on mankind. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, are chasing after the wind. And he says it here again. What a burden God has laid on the human race. We have this capacity to see all these rhythms and to ask the question, but what's it all about? Yet we cannot know. We cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end. And the rest of the chapter just seems to rub this point home. We know something's going on, but we don't know what it is. In verses 13 and 15, the teacher makes the point that, God, this is all God's work, and nothing can be added or subtracted ultimately from his plans and purposes for his creation, for what he's made. Secondly, in verses 16 and 17, the teacher goes on to make the point that, we look around us and there's a lot of injustice going on in the world because it's not yet the season for everything to be weighed up and the purpose for everything to be made clear. But he says there will come a time when that will happen in the future. God will judge everything that's happened under the sun and show its reason and its meaning and its value and its worth. And then finally he makes the point in verses 18 and 22 that we are no different to the animals in the sense that, we go to the dust just like they go to the dust. And he says there that God is testing us so that we'll see that we ultimately gain no more. We have no real advantage over the animals under the sun. The point he's making there is that, just like the animals, or the animals just like us, experience all these seasons in life, but they don't have the capacity to stand back and to ask that bigger question. And we know that. We know that we're different from them. We know that we have some sort of capacity that they don't to reflect on life and to consider its meaning. And yet, even with that extra capacity, we end up going to the dust just like they do. We're no better off. We have no greater capacity to work life out finally than animals do. And so what is the conclusion of all this for the teacher in this part of his exploration about what can be gained under the sun? There's that famous quote, isn't there, from Shakespeare when Macbeth says, it is a tale, that is life. It is a tale, life is a tale, told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Is that what we are to conclude? It might feel like the teacher is heading in that direction. But he doesn't land there. No, the teacher insists there is a rhyme and a reason to living life under the sun. We just don't know it, and deliberately so. God subjects us to this so that we would understand our place in creation. And so where he lands finally in terms of just living under the sun is here. The teacher says here in this passage, therefore, I know there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live. So what? What does the teacher finally conclude about all this? We might want to conclude, along with William Shakespeare from the lips of Macbeth, life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. It feels as though the teacher might be heading in that direction, but he doesn't. Right through the book of Ecclesiastes, the teacher insists that God is there. He constantly refers to God. God is behind it all. No, the teacher concludes, there is a rhyme and a reason to life under the sun. We just don't know it. What's more, deliberately so. God subjects us to this kind of frustration that we might see our humble state in creation as well as our elevated state. We have this capacity greater than the animals, and yet at the same time, in a real way, we just like them. And so be humble. Realize that there is nothing better to do than just to trust God with what's going on in the world. And so in terms of living life under the sun, for the moment, the teacher concludes, therefore, in this passage, in this chapter, it says, therefore, I know there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live. Just go with the flow, go with the seasons, enjoy it for what it is basically his conclusion. You know, when I went to the footy with my wife, with that CU group, she had no idea what was going on, but she just soaked it up. She didn't try to understand all the rules. She wasn't constantly asking questions. It was going to be impossible in that short amount of time to really understand it all. And so she just soaked up the atmosphere. When people cheered, she cheered. When people booed, she booed, even though sometimes she didn't know what they were booing about. At one point during the game, she was so at peace with her relationship with the game that she just fell asleep. I mean, she denies that she fell asleep, but her head was on my shoulder, and her eyes were closed. She just went with the flow. She went with the seasons, if you like, off that game. And that, in part, is what the teacher is concluding. Go with the flow. We are not in control. We don't happen to life. Life happens to us. Enjoy it and hang on to your role lightly in the kind of lightness that wisdom gives us. Amen.